subject matter is counseling the birth family post-surge. My name's Carol Teresk. I'm a clinical social worker, also a birth mother. I'd like to start by just getting an idea of who you all are. So if we want to start maybe in this direction, Carol, and go around. If everybody would just introduce themselves, let us know whether you're a member of the triad, whether you're a therapist, clinician, whatever. So we'll have kind of an idea. And also, the reason you're here, any particular interests that you have, any particular thing that you'd like to learn from this.
I'm Carol McGreer. I'm a birth mother.
I'm Willette Scheidler. I'm a birth mother and an adoptive mother.
I'm Soledad, and I'm a birth sister.
I'm Chris Mackey, and I'm a birth mother.
I'm Kim Butterfield. I'm a birth mother and a clinical social worker. I see it again.
I'm Elaine White. I'm a social worker, and I'm also a group leader, and I'm an adoptee.
Ruth Jason, birth mother, Mexico City.
Curry Wolf, I'm a birth mother and a searcher.
Cindy Schapp, I'm from Orange County, California. I have a cub group out there, and I'm also a surgeon.
I'm Patty Bryant. I'm a birth mother, social worker, although professionally I work with the elderly. But I and friends of mine co-founded Ties That Bind, which is a Connecticut support group.
I'm Kira McCall, and I'm a birth mother.
Mary Tweeden, and I'm a birth mother, and I work with Oregon Adoptive Rights Association and support separate system.
I'm Kathy Bazili, and I'm a social worker, and I do post-reunion counseling at an agency in Canada.
I'm Rona LaPalooza, and I'm a birth mother and a co-leader of Pittsburgh Adoption Connection.
Joanne Benedict. I'm a birth mother and an adoptee.
Lois Holden, I'm a birth mother and a social worker.
Bernice Lawson, I'm a birth mother.
Monica Byrne. I'm a birth mother, and I work with a search and support group in Canada.
Nancy Safestone, I'm a birth mother.
Thank you. We have a lot of birth mothers here and some social workers, and we had some adoptees, is that right? A lone adoptee, anybody else an adoptee? One thing that we've all had in common, I don't know if we've all given birth to children, but we've all been born. And I'd like to start out, before we get into our discussion, with a guided imagery, kind of get us in the mood, the idea of what it's like to be back inside your mother's womb, what it might be like to spend 9 months there, and then to be abruptly separated for a period of maybe 18 plus years, maybe forever. So I'd like you all to relax as much as you can in these chairs. Feel free to kick your shoes off. It's better if you don't have your legs crossed, so you can let some blood flow, kind of let your hands loose so you can. How dark does it get in here if we turn out the lights?
I've not managed to change it. Of course, that's the way the world works.
Well, we'll just pretend it's dark. Definitely need to close our eyes. I'd like you to start by just getting in touch with your body, getting in touch with your breathing. And just breathe deeply, inhaling through your nostrils, filling your chest up with air. Exhaling. Just breathe and tune into the sounds around you. We can hear people talking in the next room. The sound of my voice. The sounds inside yourself. Any thoughts that come and go, just let them float in, float out. No need to concentrate. Just feel whatever's there. As you're breathing, you might think to yourself, as you inhale, the word so, and as you exhale, the word hum. It's kind of like a mantra, just a sing-songy, nonsensical, rhythmic way of breathing without thinking. And as you breathe in, so, you might notice the coolness of the air in your nostrils. Just fill your chest up with air and exhale. And just be aware of whatever you're feeling. If you have to scratch your nose or sneeze or whatever, that's fine. The external sounds, the internal sounds, the feelings. Just to get in touch with the difference between tension and relaxation. Just like you to go through your body, just be in touch with parts of your body. Let's just start with our feet and just tense up both your feet. Tense them up very, very tight. Tighter, tighter, tighter. Now relax. Kind of wiggle your toes. And move up to your legs, the calves of your legs and thighs. Just tense up both your legs. Tighter, tighter, tighter. Now relax. Just wiggle your toes and legs, and maybe think of your legs like being the legs of a rag doll, just kind of dangling. Moving up your body to your lower torso, your abdomen, butt to buttock muscles. Just tighten up that lower body. Tighter, tighter, tighter. Now relax. Relax your abdomen, your buttocks, your legs, your feet. Just think of the whole lower body being loose, like a rag doll. And moving up now to your chest and back muscles. Just tighten that upper torso. Tighter, 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 tighter. Now relax. Turning your attention to your arms and hands. Just ball both your hands up in fists and squeeze those fists. Tighter, tighter, tighter. Now relax. Wiggle your fingers. Move up your arms. Tighten both your arms. Tighter, tighter, tighter. Now relax. Now turn your attention to your shoulder and neck. Just tighten up the muscles of your shoulder and neck. Tighten those muscles. Tighter, tighter, tighter. Now relax. And your facial and skull muscles. It helps to just kind of make a face like a grimace and just tighten up your facial muscles as tight as you can. Tighter, tighter, tighter. Now relax. Just be with yourself for a moment and think about the differences in feeling. Some of you may feel very relaxed. Some of you may feel a little tense. It's all right. There's no way to have to feel. Just breathe. Focus. Focus inside and outside. The sounds in the next room, the sound of my voice, the sound of the air system. And as you're focused focusing on yourself, I'd like you to think of going back inside yourself, going back in time, maybe going back to childhood. And to do that, you might want to use a staircase. Some people find it useful to think of a spiral staircase with plush carpeting of their favorite color going down and around. Or some people like to feel themselves sliding backward in the tunnel, or going down a slide, slow and winding. However it works for you, just see yourself going back in time, becoming younger and younger, maybe stopping along the way to see yourself playing or see scenes with your family, and then just keep traveling back, further, further back. Back to when you were a little child. Back to when you were a toddler. Back to when you were an infant in a crib or a cradle. A tiny, helpless infant lying there. Maybe you can see yourself as an infant lying there with your mother with your head on her shoulder and her arms around you, feeling safe, warm, content. And as you picture that, try to picture yourself kind of floating in a warm, safe, cool fluid surrounded by serenity. Back inside your mother's womb, before birth, before awareness. Nothing but calmness, peace, serenity, safety, security, awareness of your mother's heartbeat. It's safe in there. It's warm. You're totally protected. But wait, there's sounds. Sounds from the outside. You don't know what they are, but every once in a while you hear music. Maybe your mother's singing you a lullaby. Maybe someone's talking to your mommy's tummy, trying to communicate with you inside there. Maybe the doctor pushes down with the stethoscope and you feel a sensation. Maybe your mother coughs and you feel a sensation. There's awareness, and at the same time, total peace and comfort. And you develop, and you grow, you get bigger, 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 but you're still safe inside your mother's womb. getting to know her, feel her, residing in her body for 9 months, the first 9 months of your life. It's time to be born. We've learned that the birth process is quite a shock to the infant. Thrust out in the cold, strangeness, people, none of the safety and security, cold things touching you, none of the warmth, shock, trauma, the umbilical cord being cut, the very lifeline that's connected you to your mother for 9 months. Now you're separate, cleaned up, wrapped up, laid down in your mother's arms. And do you recognize her? Can you feel the sound of her heartbeat? Does she say something to you? Do you recognize her voice? Is it the same woman you spent 9 months with? We're beginning to think infants know. I had an adoptive mother tell me, wonderful woman, that when she held her adopted son in her arms for the first time when he was 3 weeks old, he stiffened up in her arms. She said he knew I wasn't the one. We're beginning to understand that infants know more than we've ever believed. And as you get ready to come back through time, travel back through childhood, back to the present. Just let yourself come back at your own pace. There's no rush. You can climb back up the stairs, float back up the tunnel. As you feel ready, come back to this room, back into yourselves. Feeling energized, relaxed, ready for the experience we're about to have this afternoon. When you feel ready, just open your eyes. Maybe stretch a little. See if your blood's still circulating. How do you feel? Feel good? Relaxed? Anybody have any feelings that weren't good? Trauma, uncomfortable feelings? Anybody not able to do it or found it a little difficult?
I went to sleep twice. Really.
Probably needed it.
The only negative thing that I felt was after the birth, and I was wrapped up and placed next to her, that she was very, very exhausted. This was a very long labor, and I felt apologetic.
Apologetic. It's your fault. Is that a theme in your life?
I hope not.
I realized that my imagery sort of switched back between my son, who has surrendered for adoption, and myself. So, yeah, he must have been there. He was there. It was kind of this switching back and forth.
You found your son now?
When I was born, I know this for a fact, and I'm not adopting, I'm a birth mother. When I was born, there was an epidemic in the community, particularly in the prenatal, postnatal section, and all mothers and infants were separated for 18 days. And so I did feel that separation, that I didn't get to see my mother for 18 days. And we never have bonded, by the way. And it was odd. I felt myself being wrapped up and taken away into a bright lit room with obviously strangers. That was a feeling just like, well, I don't know who these people are.
Abandonment, fear?
I didn't get any of those feelings as I started to fall asleep, but it was a feeling of like, what I wanted was to be next to my mother, but that's not what I got.
Any other comments?
I felt like she did with visualizing how my son must have felt.
Your birth mother?
Yes, and I found
You found? Maybe I shouldn't have done this right after lunch. A lot of people fell asleep. Well, let me tell you just a little bit about myself, and then I want to get into some issues. I initially planned to present one case and have us talk about that particular case and the post-reunion issues that created difficulties. And as I was interviewing birth mothers, I found that there are so many specifics and we're so different. You can't stereotype birth mothers any more than you can stereotype anybody else. We've had the same experiences in that we've had children that we had to did relinquish, and in many ways there's nothing else we have in common. So I think it's important to address a number of issues that have to do with the situations that come up that create problems on an ongoing basis for the birth family. Myself, I found my son 3 years ago. I've been working as a clinical social worker since 1983. I've been working with adolescents and families since 1977. I steered clear of working with adoption until after I found my son because I couldn't handle my own issues. I'm not going to pretend that I can handle them now. This is far from resolved. I plan most of my talks and workshops that I do when I'm driving, and I was planning something on adolescent relationship addiction, which, by the way, is fairly related to this. If it wasn't for adolescent sex, we probably wouldn't have birth mothers. And I had no trouble planning that lecture. I have a half hour to drive to work and a half hour to drive from work, and that seems to be my time. I carry a little microphone with me and just kind of talk about whatever comes to my mind, a little tape recorder. And when I was trying to plan what I wanted to do for this workshop, I would talk for 3 minutes and burst into tears for 5, and talk for 2 minutes and burst into tears for 5. So I asked Carol if she had some Kleenex to bring. I'm not going to make any promises for my behavior here today. I have had training and working with adoptive families, birth families. We have a place called DePelchin in Houston, and it's a children's home, works a lot with, I guess we don't call them unwed mothers anymore, I don't know what we call them. Works with adoption, works with counseling, works with search counseling, works with post-search counseling, works with the whole triad. And so I've been trained there to work with the triad. I get referrals from a couple different places in Houston. I must admit, it's not a major part of my practice. I'm just really starting out in this. I'm still going through all the grief issues related to finding my son. I never thought I'd ever see him again when he was born. I didn't choose to relinquish. An adoption plan was made, as they put it, but I had nothing to do with making that adoption plan. My parents and the social workers and the system had to do with making that adoption plan. So my fantasies were always that I would keep him and I would run away with him, and I loved him the whole 9 months I was expecting him. And when I found him, my biggest fear was that he was going to hate me, and the first thing he said to me on the telephone was, "I've always known you loved me, and I've always known that if there was any way you would have kept me."
How wonderful.
It was wonderful. And I really feel that in that 9 months, I conveyed that to him, because that really is how I felt.
Oh, my God.
Now we can do the guided imagery.
Actually, it's a time delay.
God is speaking to us.
This is really wonderful. We were in the
How old is your son?
He's, pretty soon I'm not going to be able to say how old he was without saying I was 10 when I gave birth to him. He's 29. He was 26 when I found him. He's got a wife and 2 children. I had a 2-year-old grandson that I never knew about when I found him.
How wonderful.
My daughter-in-law since gave birth to another child that I got to see much sooner, and I still don't see enough of them. They live in Flippin, Arkansas, of all places, so we're geographically separated. His
Not by
adopted
very
family.
much.
Pardon?
Not by very much.
Well, Flippin, Arkansas, and his adopted parents, who are very threatened by me. And that's another issue I want to talk about here today. How about that? I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about myself. I don't plan to have this be a speech. I've told my story over and over again. I've gone to support groups. We have Orphan Voyage in Houston. We have various support groups for birth mothers and for adoptees and for the triad. I'm glad to give any information that any of you want about my experience. I've learned certain things from my experience and from Carol. Here is one of the birth mothers that I interviewed. Bonnie is another one. She's unable to be here today because she's attending her birth daughter's wedding this weekend. So, happy for her. Weddings are another one of the problems we run into.
Tim would be nice.
So bright. What I'd really like to do is focus on some issues that I've experienced and that other birth mothers have experienced and that birth families in general have experienced. And who's the longest? We've got a lot of birth mothers in this room. My reunion has been 3 years. It'll be 3 years in August. Has anyone been reunited longer than that?
9.
9. Wow. Okay. Maybe we get a lot of help from you.
16.
16. Okay. Good. 6. Okay.
3 months.
5. 3 months. Wow. Congratulations. That's exciting. You're still in the honeymoon period then.
Mine is, I guess, 3 days old.
3 days. Congratulations.
Yeah, my son lives in Elgin, and I stayed with he and his wife last week, arriving Thursday and then leaving here yesterday.
You're still in shock.
Yes.
That's wonderful. So you just found him.
Well, I found him in December, but we've been talking on the phone since then. We just met in person last Thursday.
How many of you were reunited with boys? That must mean something. What about girls?
And then there's that other sex that we're
Well, the reason I ask that is because one of the things I've discovered talking to people is that there seems to be a big difference between girls and boys and how they experience their reunions. More girls search, more girls are receptive. You know.
I belong to a birth mothers group in Chicago, and most of them have girls, and none of them have good relationships. I have a son, and I have the best relationship.
That's great.
And after reading it, I was expecting
The opposite.
the opposite.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's kind of strange.
I wonder if that's a notion that got started somewhere, one of those notions.
Well, I don't have any.
We don't have any good research on it.
No, the's no good research on it, and mine is.
experiential.
Yeah, mine.
Yeah, but I mean, it depends on the group you're in. If you're in a group that
Absolutely.
has mostly good, positive female reunions, then they'll say, oh, girls are easier than boys. And you know the same old thing when mothers say, well, boys are easier to raise than girls or something, you know? How you say those things, you sort of accept them as a fact.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We don't know, and that's going to be, I mean, we're just at the beginning of all of this. Hopefully there'll be research done on that.
Well, there's some statistics, because I've read that, where girls search more than boys.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, that's true.
And there was a thing about, what was it, 95% of sibling reunions are very good.
Positive.
Yeah, very positive. You know, I mean, very high percentage.
Statistically, aren't there more females born than males?
But not that big.
Not a very
Something
big,
big a
yeah.
difference, because it's something like 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 females searching to males searching. And you can almost see that in any group you're in.
But I find,
in male searching.
I find in our group, it's really dangerous, even if that's true. It's really dangerous to indicate something like that when someone's starting a search.
Oh, sure.
Because they get so conditioned, they're just locked into it, you know? And
Adds to expectations.
yeah, and you start to play it out.
Well, yeah, that's true. It could be a self-fulfilling prophecy, but it's also, I think, helpful to warn people. I was warned, and I found it very helpful that since he was a boy, since he was in his 20s, that the feelings might not be quite the same. You know, stereotypically, females have we take care of the feelings, we take care of the nurturing, we take care of all that kind of stuff. It turned out to be that way with him. I mean, we've had a basically positive reunion, but he was raised by parents who were fairly cold, and his wife told me, one of the first things she told me was she had to teach him how to hug. And that didn't make me feel real good because I'm a real touchy person, so that was kind of hard for me to handle. But and he shared a lot of emotions with me, but now that the reunion's 3 years old and it's not the honeymoon period anymore, his degrees in economics, and he'd much rather tell me how to manage my money than, deal with emotional issues, and makes remarks like, well, our relationship's just the same now as if you'd raised me. I mean, after all, I'm an adult, and, it's really not just the same. I mean, there's the ongoing grieving process. And I guess that's what I would like to start with.
Or grieving
Bonnie-
for what? I don't understand. Grieving because you didn't raise them?
Yeah, one of the first birth mothers I interviewed in Houston before I came here, Bonnie, the one that's at the wedding, can't be here today. Everybody I talked to, I asked what was their one outstanding concern, and hers was that ongoing grief that I certainly am still experiencing. I wanted to think that somehow when I was reunited with my son, that everything would be wonderful and I would have made up for everything and I would have him back. And of course, initially I had no expectations at all. I said to myself, all I want to do is find out if he's alive and well and that sort of thing. And of course, that's not what I wanted. I wanted a relationship, and I got a relationship. But even now, every time I see my grandson, who just turned 5 years old, I'm aware that I didn't see him when he was 1 month old and 3 months old and 6 months old. And I was in a swimming pool with my son a few months ago and picked him up, and I never picked him up and cuddled him. Picked him up and cuddled him. We were cool. We were fooling around. We've got pictures of him sitting on my lap. He weighs 190 pounds. It's just, there's things that. One of these books that's on the reading list, I can't think which one it is now. Bonnie mentioned it to me. The author talks about unresolvable grief.
That's the dark side of adoption.
That's the dark side of adoption. And I hate to think that there's unresolvable grief. I'd like to think it can all be resolved, but I really don't think that it can. You cannot go back and undo the adoption. And all during the process for me, and maybe for some of you, even when things are good, there's grief. I was walking with my son in a mall one day, and we were all there. My daughter was with me, my son, my daughter-in-law, my grandchild, and I just started crying. And we were having a good time, and it was the first day of it was just sad, and we sat down and talked about it. And in fact, that's when he made the remark, he puts his arm around me and says, well, even if you'd raised me, it would still be like this now. I'm an adult, but it wouldn't still be like this now. I would have had all these different experiences, I never got to count his toes. Memories, yeah.
This morning in Susan Miller gave this thing, it was mentioned you need to grieve the loss of your fantasies. And I'd never thought of it that way, both on the adoptee side and the birth parent side, that we have to fantasize to fill in those years. And then when you meet this person, they're not necessarily what you fantasize. And whether good or bad, doesn't matter. But then you have to get rid of that fantasy because it's not real.
Absolutely.
And so that's what, it's kind of like, well, your fantasy was, I would have watched him grow up, but you didn't. So now you were walking through the mall and realized now there's 3 generations walking down the center of the mall, and you missed out on 20-some years as part of that generational thing. And so you grieved what you missed, but it's the fantasy.
Are we going to pick up the meeting on this?
Probably.
My experience personally, and I know a lot of people have very different experiences, because my son lives in a small town, he's in business with his father, his adopted father. They're very enmeshed. They're very, for those of you who are clinicians, symbiotic. They're one of these adoptive families that have just kind of, my understanding, as best that I can understand the situation, is that because this woman had 4 or 5 miscarriages, it must have been awful for her, never fully grieved her infertility issues, and has both her adoptive children right there under her wing. So it makes it very difficult. We don't get together on Christmas. We get together in January. We don't get together on any of the holidays. We meet a week after his birthday, even though it was he and I that spent that first birthday together. It's always he and her that spend his other birthdays together. And, I'm still happy. I've got a lot more than I ever hoped for, but I'm still grieving and expect that I always will be about a lot of those kinds of things. And I hear the same thing over and over again from the birth mothers that I talk with.
My husband described adoption to me. He's not adopted, he was adopted by a step-parent. And as I was going through my horrible unpeeling of all this adoption shit before I found it, he said that he felt adoption was like a scar. And that immediately after, whatever caused the scar, it starts to heal. It's less years later, but the scar is still there.
Absolutely.
And I never put it in that context. And I have a surgical scar, and when it was very new, it was very red. And now it's still there 10 years later, but it's not as red, but it's still there. And in my life, that's what the adoption of my daughter was. That's what it is to me. And getting back to crying in the mall, we were at a wedding. My nephew got married first part of April, and my daughter that I gave her up got married a year ago, February. And I was unable to attend the wedding. It was a very small wedding. There were 17 guests. And she was afraid if I was there, one look and they could tell who I was. So we couldn't go. And I said, that's okay. I love you, and I'll be thinking of you that day anyway. So we were at my nephew's wedding, and here comes the bride down the aisle, and we're standing, and I turned to my husband and I said, I would have been really quiet in the back of the church and worn glasses. Nobody would have known I was there. And it just hit me like a flood how much I had missed. Another passage in our lives and another thing I missed. And I don't know that it is resolved. So like Marcia said in her book, maybe it's not resolved.
Yeah.
But I can deal with it. I've been given tools to deal with it and to get rid of the anger somewhat, and to deal with things as things happen.
The image of the scar is wonderful. I always told everybody it was like for me it was like going through life with somebody just chopped my right arm off at the elbow.
Yeah.
It was, they take part of my body away.
Well, these kids were part of this.
That's right.
Physically part of it.
That's right.
For me, it was a little bit different because I shut down. I don't know when I shut down, but I shut down cold. And I did not grieve, ever. I could not get in touch with it. I couldn't get in touch with anger. I couldn't get in touch with anything. So it wasn't until after I was reunited with my daughter that I was able to really cry. And I mean, I was so happy that I could cry. It's a terrible feeling when you can't. And I still have big memory loss.
You probably weren't counseled that you needed to grieve, and you just went into a state of denial.
I have big memory loss that I've gotten in contact with girls from the maternity home, and they'll tell me things I don't remember. I don't. It's like a blank. And it drives me crazy, but it was like she gave me this gift of being able to cry and being able sometimes to get in such a rage that I could feel you know, I really needed that for the healing process. Now, maybe that's different than the grief you're talking about, which I think we'll never forget.
Well, I was afraid to cry, because if I started crying, I was afraid I couldn't stop. And so that was.
Oh,
So it was an emotional control issue.
It was the most wonderful thing in the world. And my daughter cries at the drop of a hat. She's coming tonight, and she's going to
Oh,
lead
that's
the rest of the
wonderful.
conference. So she taught me how to cry and to do it with abandon and like not care.
Yeah, all right.
Like it's okay.
It
We'll
took me
talk for
16
3
years
days.
to cry. It took me 16 years to cry.
Yeah, it was 23.
And while you're talking about crying, I was starting to get teary. I'm thinking, oh, here it comes again. Thank God I cried in the jacuzzi the first time. So that it was a steaming, but it was overflowing with water, you know, it was just tears.
The first stage is always denial, and many of us stay in it until we find our children.
Yeah.
Because it's too hard to deal with. It's not death, they're still alive somewhere on this planet.
I find them.
Maybe, that's right, maybe not.
The maybe is a big part of the problem.
That's right.
I find that I've known where my son was for 5 years, or is for 5 years, and I made contact, but I haven't seen him. And you know, in talking with other birth mothers who had this kind of a situation, maybe they've seen them, but then it's turned sour. I find that it's very difficult. It's this stage of sort of being back in the denial. I can't quite move forward like I really like to. Like I think I could if I could have that contact. And you know, I've thought a lot about it, but I've started to be able to cry more. I am at least, but it's very, very slow, and I really think that that's part of it, that I can't, you know, there's no direct connection, and I can't quite access it. Because I'm real aware that I would feel all those losses so intensely if I saw him, if I, you know, really could be with him.
How long have you known?
5 years.
And he's old, Kim?
He's 22. I talked to him on the phone briefly.
But
That's
you
about all
face
he'll
to
give me.
face.
Yeah, I even tried to find him, but I couldn't.
He's not ready to see you. He says that.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of pushed him into a corner saying that. I mean, he was going to
But what do
say
you mean
that.
you can't find him? I don't understand.
No, I know where he, well, I mean, I actually went looking for his apartment. I was going to go and,
Yeah.
you know, at least observe him from
Yeah.
a distance, and I even thought I might go. I couldn't even find his apartment. I think it's actually, it wasn't circumstances where he was living, it was a college town, and he was in an apartment complex. They wouldn't tell me which apartment it was. You know, it was very complicated anyway, and I went door to door the whole bit. So I mean, what I'm saying is I've tried, you know, to access, to really find, and I probably will follow through. I may try again, I don't know, I may kind of lose energy.
Because you said eventually he wants to meet you.
Not really, he's not. I mean, I think he said he was not ready just to sort of pacify me at that point. You know, 'cause-
Do you think it's his parents?
well, yeah, I mean, I think, but at this point, you know, when if that was helpful to have him tell me, I mean, just talking to him was very helpful.
Yeah.
Because before it had been his parents, you know, sending horrible letters and the lawyer, and, you know, because I wrote to them. And so, so I think that was very, very helpful hearing from him. And I can accept that much better than I could then, but it's still
But you haven't really
very
had a
frustrating.
reunion?
No.
A
just
lot
know
of
where he
college
is.
adoptees do not wish to have a reunion as long as their parents are paying the bills.
Well, that-
Because
yes.
they're told, you go see that woman, there
The
goes the
threat
money.
is there, even if they don't say it,
Yes.
right? I know.
I
Yeah.
did see my daughter while she was in college, but I
Yeah.
know that was a major factor, but then they pushed her into seeing me. She wasn't ready. No,
She
but
really-
I would rather have not seen under the circumstances.
Yeah.
They would not leave her alone till she saw me, so how good can that be?
Who wouldn't leave you? Oh,
The
they would.
adopted parents would
Oh.
not leave her alone until she saw me. You know, because they thought, well, you really need to do it. Well, she really wasn't ready. And I said, I don't want to see you under those conditions. I'd rather it be that you want to see me and I want to see you, not that they want us to see each other. And she says, well, but we probably should see each other. And I said, well, would it make your life easier if we did see each other right now? And she said, yes. And I said, well, if that's what you're saying you want, to make your parents shut up, then we'll get together. And, you know, it was a 5-hour meeting, very tense, and her brother came to protect her in case she cried, you know, and got upset. Shuffle her off,
In case she
you
was in
know,
the trunk of the car.
home. And, you know, it's like, well, you know, how warm and intimate can that be? You know, and so we did, and then we didn't see each other for 2 years, 2 years.
So you had a waiting period.
Yeah, but I do know a lot of
How's it
people.
now?
Oh, so. A lot of people in our Cub group in San Diego that have found college students have had, they're mainly males, which I hate to make a generalization, but
they have, because their parents have said, if you continue this relationship, we are not going to support you in college. Well, when they've programmed you to go to college, and you're a good student, and you have goals, and they yank out that $10,000 to $12,000 a year from you, where are you going to get it?
And sometimes they put it, if you want to be independent, you just go be independent.
Right.
Make your own decisions.
And we've had some of them say to their birth mothers, please, I cannot communicate with you until I have a diploma. Can you wait? Wait this long?
Then after the diploma, it'll be something else that the adoptive parents will
In
find.
two cases in our group, these kids are graduating this June, and they have already for Mother's Day written the Mother's Day cards and said, this summer.
Nice.
So, and they're both males.
My adoptive son's parents, well, the father, the mother is clearly in charge, okay? And the father goes along with whatever she says. But he went over there one time, he hasn't lived with them since he was 17, he's gonna be 24, but she packed up his baby albums, everything, and said, here, you know, like, you wanna have a relationship, you're no longer ours. And he didn't want that. But this woman is just, I just can't believe it.
Well, I don't blame him for not wanting that. I think that's very cruel.
It is cruel. I mean, but these are the things that they do, though.
Yeah, I mean.
I mean, he didn't say he didn't want to be affiliated with them anymore, and I never said that he couldn't, you know, I mean, I said, those are your parents.
And
They
they
raised
knew
you.
that he didn't say that he didn't want to be affiliated.
Piece of pie, you cut it up, you hand out the pieces, and then it's over with. And
The adoptive parents have been fed just a crock, as much a crock as we were. Right, exactly. And I'm not saying that it excuses behavior, because it's time all of us wake up, but my God, they were told they could go home, and it was as if this baby was truly theirs, and there was all sorts of elaborate details by which they could act this out.
But yet they knew enough, though. They did.
But you know, I don't think it's
from
as
another
deliberate.
woman.
It was as systematic a process in brainwashing them as it was in brainwashing us.
I know they were brainwashed, but they were still adults and doing nothing.
Nah,
This
but
baby did come
it doesn't
from
make them
another
smart,
woman.
it just makes them adoptive.
Not if they
Well,
go into
they go
They're
into,
not that dumb.
they go into denial about that, though. Some of these women are so, the infertility is so traumatic that they go into a state of denial. And my son's adopted mother actually, I do believe, spent a period of time thinking she gave birth to him.
oh, I think so. I think that identification is.
Because my son's parents said that she had forgotten that her sons were adopted.
Well, the law says as if you did. I mean, they don't think it's their uterus.
Well, and they were conditioned to say that's exactly the way they should feel, because that would be the proper way to nurture that child. And if we wanted someone to take our babies and bond with them, would we not want them to really bond? And then we get the consequences of it years later, which is tacky.
Well, you know, one poignant thing that's happened with my son so far, and I mean, so far, you know, it's been a wonderful reunion, but I mean, like nothing else in life, it's not perfect either. But one kind of poignant thing that happened, my son, which is understandable, is like me, he's very reticent and he doesn't express his emotions easily. And so in some ways, that's not too great a combination.
It must do wonders.
Talk about heavy stuff. It was like when I sat down to talk to him, that it was really, you know, very strange because, and this was like what, just last Friday I'm talking about, but it was like, I guess it was so heavy that it was like my mind had to cut. Well, I felt numb while I was doing it, and now I can't remember everything I said. It was like I just suddenly started talking, and I remember in general what I was talking about. But one thing that was poignant, and of course it's a good thing I have a sense of humor, and that also I had insight into what was going on, and it kind of hit me afterwards. But you know, we were. Oh, I think it was because at one point I had said something, well, you know, like at the time I was 18 and, you know, things were different then. And he, you know, tried to be helpful there. You know, he said he understood that things were different back then, you know, et cetera. And then I made some comment about, well, you know, and like with anything, if I had it to do over again, you know, I might have done it differently. Well, I think when I said that, maybe it kind of, you know, and I guess I said, I don't know if I did say, but his adoptive parents are both deceased. His adoptive mother, he turned 24 last Sunday, and she died when he was 15, so she's been gone a while now. And his adoptive father when he was 17. But that doesn't mean there's nothing to deal with, though, because from what I've gathered so far, that his adoption, wasn't the most horrible, but, it could have been better. And one of the bright spots in it was his relationship with his adoptive mother. And so, of course, naturally, I wouldn't, want to do anything to interfere with that memory. And maybe when I said this, maybe it came, but like all of a sudden he started saying, well, I really looked like my adoptive mother, well, he didn't say adoptive mother. He said, that was the other thing, when we were talking, and this has happened before, he calls her by her first name, which, of course, he's trying to be sensitive, to my feelings when he does that, but he started saying, well, we really looked a lot alike. And he said, in fact, up until I was about 5 years old, well, when people saw us together, they wouldn't know I was adopted until, they found out, or, someone told them. But when I was thinking about it afterwards, it was like it was kind of like he had to say, well, my relationship with her was okay. There was nothing wrong with it. In fact, it was so good that it was the traditional wonderful adoption where I even looked like her or something, but
Matched up.
right.
Sounds like. So your wish to have done it different didn't really jive with his wish. His wish was that it was just the way it was.
Right, and so obvious that.
Not to discount his adoptive mother, whose relationship he can't have anymore.
Right. No, so I realize that's a very sensitive area, and of course, obviously, at the time, I didn't pursue it any further when we were talking about it, but, I'm aware that it is something I always have to be sensitive to. That, and of course, what I would hope is, and of course, this is probably being idealistic again, but that, that now that I'm there, we can just start from here. Yeah, but of course, I know you can't really do that either. But that's my.
Well, that's all you can do is start from where you present.
Well, yeah, that's.
I have a hard time because I have 2 younger daughters, and clearly there is something missing there. I have something special with them because I've been with them since they were born, and all of a sudden you're confronted with an adult. I have a hard time. I do give them a kiss and hug them once, but I feel it's not natural like with my other 2. And I don't know, I hope I overcome it. I don't know.
How long's it been?
Well, actually it's 9 months, it'll be a year.
Yeah, it takes a while, it really does, it takes a while. I want to respond to something you said about it wasn't a perfect adoption, it was okay. Did you?
Oh, well, from what I know and from what he's told me and from what his wife has said, who admits that it took her a long time to find out most of it, that he is very reticent. But at any rate, the thing was, well, first of all, his adopted father, and Scott said this right out in so many words, was a jerk. That he was kind of the black sheep of his own family. I don't mean that he was like horrible, that he got abused as far as I know, or anything like that, but he just was, kind of a loser. So his adoptive parents were divorced when he was 5. That was the first thing. And then, as I said, then of course his mother, who, as I said, apparently was one of the brighter things in his life, then died when he was 15. And then I guess then he. And at some point, after his parents were divorced, his mother they were living in Vermont, and his mother went to Pennsylvania when, she had met, and of course, he went too, but that didn't work out, and then they came back to Vermont, and then, she died, and then I guess he lived with his father and a stepmother, and it was all, kind of unstable, and I guess, obviously there was a lot of stuff that went on. There's a lot of baggage there.
The reason I wanted to make a point of that is that's another theme that I've run across talking to birth mothers. we were given the impression when these children were relinquished or adoption plan was made or whatever, that these adoptive parents were going to do better than we could. And we were all given this notion that they were going to have 2 loving parents and they were going to have a stable home and everything was going to be wonderful. And if we kept them and raised them, we were going to go on welfare, and you know, a lot of us weren't even told that there was any possibility of doing that. And then a lot of people find out that some pretty awful things have happened, from just maybe it wasn't the greatest adoption in the world or the greatest family in the world to incest, sexual abuse, physical abuse, parents getting divorced, parents having affairs, you know, just horrendous things. Adoptive parents dying. And I ran into one woman whose child's adoptive parents died when the kid was 7 years old and was raised by an aunt that wasn't even interested. And there was no mechanism, of course, for her natural mother to be notified, who would have loved to raise her at that point. You know, who would have been more than prepared
allowed
to raise her at that
because the
point.
adoption was already done.
I have two issues that I'd like to bring up and to hear, you know, your experience. I'm not an adoptee or a birth parent, but I do counseling with people who have had reunions and dealing with the aftermath. I have a woman that is in one of my groups, my post-reunion groups, and she herself was raised by her grandparents and didn't know that they were her grandparents until she was about 18 years of age. And at the time, her birth mother was actually being raised as her sister, which is not an uncommon thing. And there was never ever a formal adoption, so the name was the same, so there was no problem ever. When she found out that she had been placed with the grandparents, the grandfather in this situation was alcoholic and abusive of everyone in the family. When she found out, she became involved with the young man because she was so angry. Part of her anger at her mother for not having raised her. The mother didn't offer to raise her at this point. He wasn't very warm towards her, so she became involved with this young man, became pregnant, and the young man let her down and didn't follow through with his commitment to her, and she placed the child. And she feels that she placed this child against her own wishes. You know, the grandparents and the mother at this point forced her to place the child, and she feels the agencies didn't give her any options. So the child was placed. She placed an ad in a paper when her daughter was 18, and the daughter responded, and they did form a relationship at that point, but it was a very tenuous relationship. The daughter's relationship with their adoptive parents was very, very shaky. And at one point she moved out of the home and moved in with her birth mother. The birth mother almost bent over backwards trying to accommodate this young girl to the point of ignoring her husband, ignoring her other children. Eventually it broke down because the stress was so tremendous trying to maintain this new relationship and keeping the old ones going that eventually that broke down. The daughter turned out was fairly promiscuous at this point, was very sexually active, pretty indiscriminately active, and became pregnant herself. And at this point, the relationship between the birth mother and the adoptee totally broke down because the adoptee was saying at this point, you didn't do it, but I'm going to show you how to do it. And she has withdrawn the granddaughter, she has also had a daughter now, has withdrawn the granddaughter from the birth mother and will not allow them to have any contact, and is sort of making the birth mother suffer twice.
Punishment.
Yes, through this process. And I'm wondering, you know, whether you have ever come across this or have any suggestions as to how to help this lady deal with this, because right now she's almost at the point of, I would think, of needing psychiatric care.
Well, one thing that seems to be the case is that adoptees that experience bad adoptions experience bad reunions with the birth parents because they're very, very angry that they were given up and that they were put in this situation that was not good.
So in my case, I wouldn't call Mary's a good adoption.
Can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wouldn't agree with that because my own daughter that I found had what I would classify as a not good adoption, yet we have what I would consider an excellent relationship. So that's an exception.
Well, I mean, I think that's true. You know, my son's adoption probably wasn't the greatest either.
Yeah, I'm not talking about not the greatest. I'm talking about people that really experience. But of course, there's exceptions to everything.
Right.
Sometimes it's just the opposite. They're delighted to find a birth mother that they can relate to because they had such a bad experience. But generally, there's anger at the birth mother if the adoption didn't turn out well because this woman dumped me with these people that abused me.
If I'm following what you're saying, though, is it 3 generations?
Yeah.
I catch repeating of the same pattern, and
female adoptees become pregnant very frequently. I don't have any statistics either, but they recreate, just like if any of you have read Maggie Scarf's book, Intimate Partners, Patterns of Love and Marriage, it talks about how we recreate the past in whatever we do, not just in adoption and birth parenting, and we recreate what our parents' heritage. There's even one instance in there that just gave me goosebumps. They talked about this couple that went to a counselor and found out during the course of counseling that they were recreating the exact kind of marriage that their grandparents had, grandparents that neither one of them ever knew. It seems to be a theme, kind of a generational, intergenerational theme. We find it in alcoholism, we find it in incest, we find it in battered women, abuse. It seems like we find it in this too.
Well, my experience with this woman, the first person in this sequence, is that she's never really gotten past the stage of having had to give this child up. When she lost control of that situation, she seems to be stuck right there. And there doesn't seem to be a way of getting her to move, and I'm wondering if you have any thoughts.
The mother now you're talking about.
Yeah. She just can't get past
Is
it.
she-
I mean, she's still back there blaming.
You're a therapist, correct? She's in therapy with you? And the daughter, is she?
She won't have anything to do with anyone. She was in one of my groups at one point. Didn't say.
So she's got, you're talking about unresolved and maybe unresolvable grief.
That's, when you were talking about that, that's really what I was thinking.
It's a good question.
Have you worked with the family that she came from? Been able to get them involved? What about issues in the family that she has now? Does she have children she's raising?
She's super mom.
So what I was going to bring up, and one of the areas that I've been thinking a lot about is that, how this loss and the issues in adoption, the low self-esteem and all that stuff, birth mothers permeates the rest of my life and my other relationships. And that's, I think, makes it particularly frustrating that I'm stuck where I'm at, because I'd like to just get everything sort of in order, and I find myself circumventing, my anger and my grief gets circumvented into my relationships with the children I'm raising. So what I think about is working on making connections where I can, and working, and I think about that. Well, I think that's important for all birth mothers, and I think alienation is a big theme for us. So I think about that with this woman, I guess, would be maybe making connections that where you can help her make.
And letting go.
That's what she's having a really hard time with. She's having to go.
But you don't have to do that until you've got her solidly connected somewhere. She can't let go. She doesn't have.
Yeah, you've got to have that something to replace that with. And it's the beginning of a journey too. I mean, this daughter is not necessarily going to do that for ever.
No, that's true.
But you can't give her false hope. But this is what's going on right now. I imagine most of you are familiar with the stages of the reconciliation. It's in the handout, and some of those stages are pretty horrendous. And one of those stages talks about where they, stage number 4, disengagement stage, characterized by the adopted adult or birth parent. In this case, it's the adopted adult really moving away from the other person, not just pulling back. It can be extremely painful. Feelings of anger, loss, rejection, bitterness, and that this can occur if the expectations are too rigid or if the differences between the parties are too great. I also think it can occur if there's been too much pent-up anger and resentment.
But she's not the strongest lady in the world, because, her own history is pretty poor. She's had a really, really difficult life.
Have you ever showed her these stages?
No.
I found this helped me so much, and I found it helped other birth mothers so much, just to see that this is.
For adoptees too?
Oh yeah, absolutely for adoptees.
It's a mutual thing.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because these stages are, if you look at them and study them, they're like stages in relationships, really. But basically, when I first started having my relationship with my son, I thought every time I didn't get a phone call, when I thought I was going to get a phone call, I thought the relationship had ended. And when I started getting involved professionally and learning about it and came up with these stages, the honeymoon stage is wonderful.
then the timeout stage where you pull back and all these stages, but then if you go all the way through, and I'm not to say these are discrete stages, I mean, they, overlap and back and forth and all over the place, but there is stage 5, which is the solidifying stage, and people do get back to that. Not always, there's no guarantees, but it might help her to see that she's in a stage right now with this young lady, and that doesn't necessarily mean she'll stay in that stage.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about was genetic sexual attraction and whether you had any kind of involvement with things like that and what type of counseling.
Barb Gagnon, of course, works a lot with that, is writing a book on it, is doing a workshop on the conference. I had a tremendous struggle with genetic sexual attraction with my son. I walked in and looked at him, and he looked just like me. And it was like looking in the mirror. It was looking at myself 20 years ago if I were male. It was looking at myself just as I was now. It was incredible. And our first meeting was at Disney World. Talk about fantasy. And we haven't discussed it because he's an economist, right? But we would get on these rides together and, be sitting with our shoulders touching and be in these rides in Disney World, and I had this electricity going through my body that was like being 16 years old again, sitting next to a boyfriend, and it was frightening. And if it hadn't been for the fact that I knew Barb Gagnon and had discussed genetic sexual attraction with her, I would have probably freaked.
Did he remind you of her natural father?
No, he didn't look anything like his natural dad, but
And
that's
he didn't make you have feelings for the natural father?
not really. Not really, no. Although that's something, in fact, this is perfect timing because I asked Carol to be here with me today. I dragged her here. I coerced her. Blackmailed her. I don't want to interrupt people, but there are some things I think is just real important, and I want everybody to get all their questions answered, and probably we need 5 hours for that. But this is perfect timing. The birth father issue is a tremendous issue for a lot of women, and I don't know how you want me to do this, Carol. Do you want me to kind of tell your story, or?
I'll fill in.
You'll fill in. You tell me. You can tell me how I'm doing it wrong. The birth father can be anything. Women I've talked to, one birth father was a rape. Another birth father was her own father. It was incest. Another birth father was someone she was very much in love with. Another birth father was just a friend that she happened to have too much to drink one night and went to bed with. The birth father of my child, and this is totally different than anybody that I've ever run across before, but I was in love very much with a boy who was 3 years older than me, who had gone, I lived in Chicago at the time, Detroit at the time. He had gone to Florida to learn his father's business. He was going to come back, we were going to get married, all that wonderful love stuff. When he left, I felt this tremendous sense of abandonment. And for those of you who know what this is, I'm an adult child of a dysfunctional family. So I never experienced any love from my parents. My mother was an emotional void. I believe that I got pregnant. I started seeing his best friend, my boyfriend's best friend, who was also a very good friend of mine, platonic friend. We've been friends for 4 or 5 years. I had sex with him twice. I did it purposefully to get pregnant. I had no idea consciously at the time that that's what I was doing. But I knew my cycle, and I knew when 14 days was, and I had sex with him and then had sex with him again within about a 2-day period. Didn't particularly enjoy it, didn't do anything for the relationship, didn't have any real feelings for him except that he was a friend. Knew from the moment I conceived, knew through my whole pregnancy that I was going to have a son. And my idea, this is how I got into psychology. What interested me to begin with in psychology was studying Freudian psychology and penis envy, because I had this notion that I gave birth to this boy baby to prove to my father that I could give him the son that my mother never would, and that I was certainly better than her, because I could do this and she wouldn't. I put this all together later. I haven't run across anybody that's...
Were you also angry with the boyfriend who went to Florida?
I felt very abandoned, because he had taken the place of the mother and father that had emotionally deserted me. So I don't know if I was angry. That's a good point. I was probably angry. What a nastier thing to do than go get pregnant by your boyfriend's best friend.
They got revenge for that.
But because of that, the birth father issues for me have not been so poignant. Now my son may want to search for his birth father, and I'm sure I'll have some issues with regard to that when that happens. Now Carol's experience was real different, and I think I really better let you tell it. It would not do you justice for me to to sit here and tell your story. But I think this is real important because this is the kind of thing we run up against.
Well, let's start with saying, we all know how long ago this was. I was 16 when I got pregnant. I was in my sophomore year. It was an established relationship with someone I loved very much. I was probably about 5 months pregnant when my mother found out. Actually, didn't know, of course, at the time when I was 16 what denial was, and probably didn't know until 4 or 5 years ago when I started searching what denial was. But if ever there was denial because I was still waiting for my period any minute now at 4 months. And my mother announced to me, "You're pregnant." And right then is when it became real. And I thought, oops, well, that's it now. And it was like I was pregnant from then, because I had certainly not been pregnant the day before that. Arrangements were quickly made for me to enter the maternity home. My boyfriend and I were still maintaining a relationship. He was out of town that summer, and his parents had him give me the money that he had made during the summer to put towards my room and board. Much to his dismay. While we were maintaining the relationship, he sure wanted to buy a car with that money. You know, we were both 16. I entered the maternity home where my name was quickly changed to something else that no one has no relationship to anything else, and it appears on all the legal documents. I want everyone to know that it does happen. It's on Texas. It was in Oklahoma. It's on her original birth certificate. It's on the relinquishment papers. It's on the adoption papers. So if anybody ever tells you that doesn't happen, I'm here to tell you that it does. When my daughter was born, it was a fairly long labor, the longest one that I had had. The grapevine in the maternity home was that you weren't going to be allowed to see your baby. And then when I was, at the end of the labor, going into the delivery room and pretty much out of my head, and saw the huge mirror up there, and I thought, well, of course I'm going to see her. There's no way. I'm going to see her right now. And right before the delivery, a nurse walked up beside me and said, "Honey, this will just be for a minute." And she put a huge towel over my face. And the room fell silent, and my daughter was delivered. No one said anything after that moment, and she was quickly removed from the delivery room.
What year was this?
1966. I had never experienced a blackout of any kind or a blocking out of anything. And I did not remember that. I remembered what I thought was the whole delivery all the way up to 1986 when I began my search. When I began the search was when I remembered that moment. And when I began remembering it was when I got angry. At first I thought, no, I must have seen a movie or dreamed that or fantasized that, but no, that happened. The papers, relinquishment papers, were signed about 2 weeks later. That was the law in that state, was that if you were under 18, you waited 2 weeks before you went to court. You had to make a special arrangement through the social worker to even see your child. From the moment she was born, no medical personnel referred to a baby. It was as if you were in the hospital for some other reason. Even though we were on the maternity floor, we were segregated by a curtain and had 2 private rooms. So you could hear the babies crying every time they were taken to be fed, but you were not allowed to see them or touch them or even hear about them. So I asked the social worker, I didn't ask, took all of the aggressiveness I could come up with at that low point in my 16-year-old life, 17 then, I've been 17 for 6 days, to say I wanted to see her on the day I went to court. And she said, well, honey, we're pressed for time, but let me call the nursery. And so she called the nursery and said we were coming over. And she took me into the circumcision room, which had a window in it to the nursery, and a nurse held her up, bundled in a blanket. And all I could see was her hands and her face, and her hands were up here. And the only thing I could do was to say, don't cry, because if you cry, you can't see her, and this is the only time in your life you'll be allowed to see her, so don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. And I didn't cry. And went to court, the social worker then takes you to lunch. That's her last little duty. She takes you out to lunch and discusses your future. Now what are you going to do with your life? And then I went back home, back to reality, back to high school, and my boyfriend and I had maintained a relationship up until that point.
as soon as I went back to school, it became quickly apparent that he was also maintaining another relationship that he had begun while I was absent. And about 2 weeks after I went back to school, he arranged it, so we broke up. He was through being discreet, and he was through being responsible, and it was all a big downer, and he was 16 years old and ready to go on. So I lost them both in a month, and I had placed a lot of need. I'm not coming up with the right word here, but I needed him right then, and he was all of a sudden not available to me. So that relationship, there was no resolution. It was sort of one day he was there and one day he was not. Even though we attended the same high school, he didn't say, our relationship is over, I don't love you. He just was gone. And what time is it? It's 24 years later, and he still hasn't said that. And we have had periodic contact in those 24 years, and it's always at my initiation. He's always more than cooperative with me, but I have at this advanced age finally realized that the relationship only exists in my head, and he does not feel the same as I feel, although he's willing to cooperate with me. So during the search from almost a year, between 86 and 87, while I am otherwise happily married and functioning in another family, I also had an affair with the birth father, which ended abruptly right after he'd also had a very happy reunion with our daughter. His attention then was all focused on her, which only lasted a very short time too. He cooled. He thinks everything is fine with their relationship, but he lives in the same city with her, and he sees her maybe every 3 months. But initially, he comes on like a super daddy because he knew that she had not had a good relationship with her adoptive father, and was very attentive to her for a brief period. Can you tell them about the scene at the...
Which one?
I found Mary in July of 87, and our 20-year high school reunion was at the end of August. Mary had just moved, she moved the month after. She was living in Amarillo, I was living in Houston, and the birth father still lives in Oklahoma City, as does much of the rest of the birth family. I made plans to go to the class reunion. The birth father was also going to the class reunion. We were still in communication at that time, and he said, well, we'll just go together. And Mary decided she'd like to come and spend that weekend with us because what she said was it might be the only time that the three of us can be together. So we all three went to our 20-year high school reunion. And she was very happily introduced as my daughter, who's 21. And the people that mattered were overjoyed. The people that didn't know then, didn't know now, and didn't care, couldn't give a hoot. We had, that song, I Had the Time of My Life.
Happy ending.
That was it. I had the time of my life. We all three danced together slow, and it was wonderful. And then he tried to ruin it for me the day after by saying I was selfish in dragging her and displaying her in front of all these people. But I was there, and he enjoyed himself, and we all had a good time. So I didn't allow him to wreck that one for me. But
I hope you don't allow it to wreck your life with your husband.
well, so far it hasn't. That was 87, and this is 90, and we're still doing fine. I wanted Carol to tell you about that, though, because she was willing to share that. It's a very sensitive topic, and it's one of the biggest issues that I've come across is what to do about the birth father. A lot of birth mothers want to pretend he doesn't exist. Their husbands certainly want to pretend he doesn't exist. And then the adoptee comes into the picture, and the adoptee doesn't necessarily want to pretend he doesn't exist. So you come up with issues like, do you search for the birth father? Do you tell him about the birth father? Do you help him find the birth father? What if the birth father rejects him? You worry about the adoptee's feelings. What did the birth father turn out like? Was he a jerk back then? Is he still a jerk now? Has it gotten worse? What are you going to find? How is it going to affect your family? Is your husband going to divorce you? It's traumatizing to the whole family. Husbands are very threatened by the idea that their wives are going to be reunited, and both of them end up having these fantasies of they're going to create this original nuclear family again. So it's one of the most sensitive issues we deal with, and or don't deal with.
I have a real hard time because I didn't search for my son until he was about 22, or I started my search, and I didn't realize how long it would take me. And I had a lot of repressed feelings that surfaced while I did my search. And I had dreams at night that brought up a lot of what had happened that I just didn't want to face up to.
So I had this fantasy that I saw him in the hospital. We weren't allowed to hold the children, but I did go up to the window, and I had a C-section, so I was in the hospital like 10 days at the time. And I saw him every day, and then when I had my subsequent children, they looked just like he did as infants. So I assumed my son looked sort of like my side of the family, at least. And then the shock of my life is when he sent me pictures, and he looks almost exactly like the birth father. And I have no good feelings about him, and I think that's what's holding me back too, because I realized I came from a dysfunctional family too, and being involved with him, my mother didn't like him, I was very rebellious, so I hurt myself in the end. But the point is, I say at one point, this is part of me, this is my son, and on another part, he's the man that I cannot, I realize now that I should have never been involved with in the first place, and today I probably wouldn't have never even gotten involved because I've come that far. And it's a real hard issue for me to deal with.
And does your son want to search, or?
Well, he has contacted his father, right? In fact, he told me after the fact that he contacted him. And I was really hurt because it was a long search for me. I had invested a lot of money in it, and I thought all of a sudden this man who just abandoned me and went back to his wife and everything.
Gets all the goodies.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I felt, and I was really upset about it. But little did I know, he doesn't want to have anything to do with his son. And my son is going through a real hard thing with that. Because not only that, he looks almost exactly like him, and he can't see this person. I don't have any pictures. And, it's just it's difficult for him, it's difficult for me, and it was very difficult for my husband because, here it's like, here's a person that I was involved with, 23 years ago, is always in our house, and I don't know,
I hope we realize that our children have a right to know their birth parents, and they need to know their birth parents.
I have no problem with that. In fact, I'm the one who gave him every bit of information. I just was kind of surprised that we hadn't even, I don't even know if we met. I think we were just in correspondence. But, see, my son lives in Tucson, and the birth father and I live in Chicago. So
what he does with that relationship is his business.
I know that.
We need to let them know.
Well, I'd even be willing to talk to the birth father for him, but he's just dead set against meeting him. I feel really bad for him. I wish he would because, he looks at me, he doesn't see anything in me. I mean, I know I'm his mother. I mean, I have all the facts and stuff, but I think he needs to see someone who he looks like. And that's real difficult. And it breaks my heart that this guy won't have anything to do with him. He didn't say, you're not my son. In fact, he was real overjoyed the first time he called him. But then after a time, he was supposed to meet him, he thought it over, and now he decided that, no, I don't want it. Then I found out that the marriage that he was in when I was involved with him, he had an 18-month-old daughter when my son was born, and he subsequently went back with his wife. He later gave up her for adoption. So this guy doesn't have anything to do with kids in his life.
We have the opposite in our area because we have such good newspaper coverage of our group. We have birth fathers coming to the group, birth fathers who want to search, who oftentimes have been in touch or will be soon with the birth mother, who then says, I don't want anything to do with this, it's for you.
Yeah, we have some of that too in
And that can
Houston.
be real hard. And I must tell you that the birth fathers that have come to search have come through 12-step programs and I'm so proud of them. And it has given me a total different
But
perspective.
sometimes, do they contact the birth mother to get permission or to
No,
make the connection?
We talked about this birth mother issue because here they are sitting in a room like this, and there's maybe 5 birth fathers, or here's some
One.
or 2 or 3 or whatever, and then we will say, okay, wouldn't you like the birth mother to know maybe what you were doing if you knew where she was? Wouldn't you like to kind of share?
Well, in some cases, we've had that same experience just with a few birth fathers coming, and in some cases, it's been pretty apparent that this is the birth father's search, and that he doesn't have to go to her for information.
Oh, no.
So there's not really any reason for him to make that contact.
So, some of them want to, others say, no, I really don't even know where she was, she moved back or whatever.
And some
I
have
just
to get
do
the
it for
basic
me.
information. Some don't have the birth date. Some birth
Right.
fathers don't have the birth date.
And then we had one birth father contact the birth mother because he couldn't connect on the birth day, the actual birth day. This is 26 years ago. And he called the birth mother, and she said, I don't know what you're talking about. I have nothing to say to you. And his feeling intuitively was, now he doesn't think he fathered the child. And they were 15 years old.
No, that's not it. I don't think that's
he
it.
said, I don't know why I feel this, but he said, now I'm wondering if I really was the fall guy for this, or if I really didn't father the child.
Or
I mean,
she
he's
just
going
doesn't
through.
want to be.
Well, of course she doesn't. But here's this man coming to support and he says, I don't know. And I can't get anything out of her.
I searched with the birth father. I can
2 years before I started searching, I had called him up. I had not talked to him for 17 years. Just said hi.
Well, that was like part of the reason for me contacting him again at this time. I'm about to do this, and I wanted to let you know and get your
Why didn't
feelings
I
about
that
it.
for that reason at all? I mean, I was sitting having champagne with friends, and they said, "What happened to him?" I said, "I don't know. His name's in the phone book." They said, "Why don't you call him?" And I said, "Give me another drink." So I went in and called him, and we were having a little reunion, a bunch of people from high school, and so I went in the bedroom and called, and we talked for quite a long time. And one of the first things he said out of his mouth is, he says, "Do you know where our daughter is?" And I said, "No, I don't." He says, "I've always wanted to look for her, but I could not remember her birthday. I didn't remember the name of the agency. I didn't know how to go about it. I used CTV programs, but I, didn't figure out how they do it." And everything. He said, "I've driven by your mother's house for the last 17 years, hoping that you'll walk out the door one day." And I said, "Well, she moved like 3 years later, so you've been driving by for an awfully long time for no reason."
And he couldn't pick. I mean, he's sure not going to find her. He can't pick up the phone book to find
his
you.
normal way of avoiding a problem is to go to sleep. At least he was conscious. I mean, And so it just started out a relationship. I fell back in love with him in my mind. We started talking on the phone. He lives in LA. I live in San Diego. And we started talking on the phone 2 and 3 times a week, 3 and 4 hours apiece. I became 17 years old all over again. I couldn't wait if he didn't call me when he said he was going to call me. I'd sit home. I wouldn't go to work. I wouldn't do anything. I was like this teenager, No one get on the phone. Fortunately, the kids were at school. And, it was just really overpowering in my life.
And it's hard to keep those other kids off the phone when you're waiting for a phone.
Well, I finally got in there online, and it was just ridiculous. And it was a whole thing that I had to go through reliving. He had to tell me about the day I signed the relinquishment papers, because I still don't remember. I have a feeling now that he explained to me what I was like that day, but I still don't remember it. And it was a healing thing, and we searched together. It was my search, but I made him fill out, ISRR and do all these things because I said, she should have everything. We were together for 9 months after she was born. And when we searched and found in my contact letter, I said that, the 2 of us had searched together and so forth. I didn't tell her his name, just that he was in Hollywood. And Hollyweird. He's a rock photographer in Hollywood. And, sure. And so I thought it was wonderful, and I was also very glad that she only wanted to communicate with me at first, and then she shut down on me and started communicating with him, and I was very hurt. At this point, he and I are not speaking, because I yelled at him a year ago, and still had issues that I needed to deal with our breakup because it wasn't done properly. We had never said the final goodbyes properly, even though we spent 4 years, recently trying to take care of them and trying to understand what happened, because we had been very close and very much in love, and our parents should have let us get married. And I think they all regret it now. And so right now I don't know where the relationship is. I'm just wondering, is he in communication with her? I mean, she doesn't say anything to me, but then it is their relationship and stuff. But it's a whole ball of wax that you have to get in touch with. And yes, indeed, this is her father, and she's very much like him. She's very much like me and stuff. But I think I'm very thankful I searched for him first, which was going down the Hollywood phone book and saying, "Oh, here you are." And calling him and getting a lot of that over with and being able to give her, both of us, at the same time. But she was not ready to see him for 2 years after the reunion. I mean, wow. Then she called him up one day when she found out that I was kind of maybe spying on her and said, "I think it's time we meet." So they saw each other that evening so that she could hurt me. But that's all right.
I really appreciate your comments here today. You've been a great group. Looks like we're out of time.
We could do this for the rest of the night.
Anybody, I'm sure, that wants to continue the conversation can do so outside the room. In terms of the birth fathers, that seems to be a real big thing. And I think the lady over here that says they have a right to know both of us is absolutely correct. On the other hand, we need to deal with the emotions about that. It's not a neutral subject.
They were raped. Mine was date rape, which I didn't even know the word until last year. The first time I've ever said it publicly. And he died many years ago. She adores his image, and she hates me because I made her suffer. She has turned my other children against me because of what you did to poor Katrina. Gave her away. And also, now there's the top. She has adopted my husband, the father of my children, who is also dead, as her stepfather. And my other children feel terribly guilty that they had him and she didn't. And then I was so mean to deprive her of his model stepfather, who would never have married me if he'd known about that child.
Yeah. You're really the victim.
Yeah, I'm getting
So the survivor.
Sure, I'm powerful.
The bad guy, the survivor.
Yeah. But it's just an interesting, most of these cases, I don't even talk about the adoptee going through different stages. She is now going through adolescence, I think. She's taking La Bamba lessons. She's 55 years old, and she's taking La Bamba lessons 3 or 4 times a week.
Very good cardiovascular.
Think of it that way.
Aerobics. Thank you all. Thank you.